Welcome to another episode of the Office Altering Hire and Empower with Molly McGrath podcast. If you're a returning listener, welcome back. If you're a first-time listener, hopefully you'll become a long-time listener. As always, I'm your show host, Molly McGrath, founder of Hiring and Empowering Solutions and creator of this revolutionary podcast. You can check us out at hiringandempowering.com. All right, guys, I'm so excited for this two-part series. Team members, you have been begging and praying for this, of how to grow trust in the workplace. We had last mindset course, and go back and listen if you haven't, when we had Nicole come in, certified psychiatrist, and talking about the 3 levels of anxiety, and by and large, what leads prominent in the legal space by design. Attorneys are attracted to the level 3 of called control of anxiety. And so go back and listen to that, because we talked a lot about growing trust and how to get out of this white knuckle need for constant control, which always triggers us as team members. And I always say us because I was a team member one time. I've sat in both seats where we hear that. Where are you at with this? Why did you do this? What have you? Our immediate knee-jerk reaction is they don't trust us. And Nicole talked a lot about control. So I'm really excited. You all have heard me talk about Colby. You've heard me talk about Gallup Strength Finder. And we have Tara here, and she's going to hit it off and with aligned strategy. I met Tara through Melissa Shanahan. Many of you know Melissa. She's been on my podcast. I'm an EO with her. I talk about her all the time with her Monday Map and Friday Wrap. And Melissa, I'm like, who in the world has been coaching you? And she said, oh my goodness, you have to meet Tara with Aligned Strategy. She is certified in all things around Gallup, the Strength Finder, building a strong foundation, a trust. And we're going to also be talking about conflict on Thursday. So I'm just really excited. I know you have a jam-packed agenda, Tara, but I'm completely honored. And I have over here on my wall, when you went through my Strength Finder with me, and I have my chart that I'm constantly looking at. So I'm really, really grateful for the work that you're doing in the workplace.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you and your group, and to talk about trust, which is, I feel like, a difficult subject to get our arms around.
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll get started. So
yes.
As Molly said, my name is Tara Gronhovd. I'm the owner of Align. I'm a coach and business consultant. I work with small businesses, teams, leaders, individuals who are seeking transformation by leveraging their strengths. As Molly said, I'm Gallup certified strengths coach, and I'm also an E2Grow certified high performing teams coach. And really, I view it as my purpose to be a change agent to help people and teams transform. And I really do what I love because I believe that healthy leadership matters at every level. And I believe everyone is a leader. Everyone has an opportunity to lead, no matter their position or title. And so we all have an opportunity to be leaders wherever we're at, which we'll discuss a little bit today, because trust really starts with our own leadership too. So we have some materials that are going to be put, it says here emailed out, they'll be put in the Academy, I believe. I'll also upload them here. And so I can upload those if you want to follow along with the handout, or if there's a follow-up. If you're on and you want to participate, we encourage you to do that. I encourage you to do that. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to me with questions afterwards. So I'm going to give you a ton of information today, and any number of concepts we touch on could be its own topic. So there's no lack of information, but I know it's a lot. I think workshops like this, I just think of as mining for gold. So what are the 1 or 2 nuggets you can pick up and take with you and put into action? And that's what I really hope you're listening for today. So today we're going to talk about the really comfortable topic of trust. Aren't you happy that we aren't all meeting in person to talk about trust? What if I made you all do trust falls? And a lot of the content today is taken from this book, The Thin Book of Trust by Charles Feltman. Actually, his work is quoted frequently by Brené Brown, if you're familiar with Brené Brown. It's less than 80 pages. It's quick, but a very powerful read, because the reality is we deal with trust and mistrust every single day at work. But because trust is so fundamental and so big, it's actually a really hard thing to talk about. So giving language to what we mean by trust is really important. And that's what I hope to do for you today. So I love this definition that he has of trust. Trust is choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions. So making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions. And distrust is what's important to me is not safe with you, or maybe in this situation or any situation. And if you think about that, then there's a lot of opportunities for trust to be broken in different ways, even unintentionally. So I'd like you to consider a struggle, a challenge, a person you've experienced where trust is an issue, meaning the lack of trust is causing a problem. There's likely a situation or maybe a person who pops into your head. We're not going to talk about it here, but just imagine it. Now, I want you to imagine that you have to tell that person in 2 minutes. You have to tell that person point blank that you don't trust them. Most of us would rather get a root canal than have to tell someone we don't trust, right? That we don't trust you, because it is instantly triggering and it is really difficult. And depending on who it is and what kind of relationship it is, most of us really would rather get the root canal than have to tell them. And yet, without being able to name the issue and talk about it, our trust problems continue to grow. So Molly, you said earlier that this is something that the group has been asking for. And I think we live with distrust every day. And to the point where we don't even realize how much it's bogging us down. It becomes almost like pollution in the air. I'm just curious, what are some of the things you see with trust in the workplace when it comes to the law firms that you're working with?
I'd say number one, in no particular order, I'll just download it a little bit. Not trusting the boss, the attorneys, not trusting their team, that they're doing their work. I hear this over and over and over again. I don't know if you know this, Tara, but legal by and large is way behind the times when it comes to a hybrid or remote model. And so often they will say, how do I know what they're doing all day? And that's the number one thing that I hear from the entrepreneur, the business owner, the leader, is that if they can't micromanage and see everything that they're doing, not only what they're doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it, and they can't fully understand that. So their knee-jerk reaction and constant behavior and habits are, where are you at with this? Where are you at with that? Where are you with? Or they'll give them only one little thing and expect disappointment, expect that they're going to drop the ball. And then when they get proof of concept of that, they go back into the vicious cycle of not trusting.
Yeah.
And then for the team members, I think for them, what they feel, the attorneys will white knuckle and not delegate. They won't give up control, and they see them constantly stressed out, truly spread for time. You can take a look at their calendar and see that they don't even have time for a sandwich or a drink of water, let alone anything else. And then the team members are just sitting there feeling completely guilty a lot of times for collecting a paycheck when they know they could take 50% of the stress off of the attorney's time, but they feel like, well, I don't trust that if I just puke out what I want and just give them what they want, that they have the capacity, the capability, the confidence to be able to go out and project manage it and create it and come back with a proposed solution. So they feel like they have to have everything figured out, and they have to expect everything that could possibly go wrong before they'll delegate something. The third column, I'll tell you, that just really popped in my head is not trusting clients. So often I'll hear team members and attorneys kind of bash their clients and bag on their clients. like, oh, they're not giving this information because they don't want us to know their financials. So they won't fill out the personal information form that they have to. So we're going to cancel their appointment because clearly they don't trust us, even though they never even met them. Or where there is really truly proof that clients are not in power and partnership with you, and how to have that conversation with I know myself, even my own business. I have some clients that there needs to be a crucial conversation with that I know don't trust us. No reason for it at all, but that's kind of, I know that's their default of, where, so when there's lack of power and partnership, and law firms deal with that sometimes, especially if they're doing high criminal defense, bankruptcy, things of that nature. We go to this place that they're not divulging all the information up front. And I'm sure you're going to hit this, but it might be because we haven't set the groundwork or the framework for them to be fully transparent and honest.
Yeah, it's so even in hearing you talk about all the different ways trust might become an issue in the law firm workplace, I think it really gets to the complexity of trust, which is, we talk about the word trust, but it means something different in a lot of different situations. And no two people would define it the same, right? So I don't trust someone, and that might be because they have spelling errors all the time. And,
oh, I hear that all the time.
But do you really not trust them? Because there's a lot of areas for trust. Or do you, and does that, so where do we project an issue in one area onto the rest of their capacity or their competence? And so it gets complicated. So I'm going to walk through these 4 distinctions of trust, because I think it helps dial in what conversation needs to be had. Because there's probably at least four different conversations that could be had around trust. And I hope this is helpful. So I always say the problem with trust, it's both squishy and triggering. It's hard to define, and yet when someone brings it up, we are all on the defense. So high levels of distrust are associated with a decreased amygdala activity and low end fear. So the amygdala is in the back of our brain. It's where we go in fight or flight. It's where we go in fear. And so as soon as we feel like someone doesn't trust us, we tend to go to that part of our brain, which actually turns off the thinking part of our brain, and it increases the likelihood that we make more mistakes. So it actually, that lack of trust and feeling that lack of trust actually increases the chance that we're going to do something to break trust, which is ironic, right? So that trust and fear, those trust and fear are inversely related, and fear activates that amygdala and trust decreases its activation. So trust frees up our brain for other activities like creativity, planning, accuracy, decision-making. So we need trust to feel safe in the workplace, to show up as our best selves. So when we feel like we're not trusted or we can't trust, when that fear comes in, we end up moving into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Now, a lot of people have heard fight or flight. Freeze is when you don't know what to do and you just shut down. Fawn is when you go into people pleasing and you say whatever you need to say, no matter what, just to get out of the conflict, right? And we'll talk about that, more about that on Thursday. But the disaster of distrust in the workplace is that the strategies we use to protect ourselves get in the way of our ability to effectively build trust with others. So let's say I don't trust you, I'm likely to employ at least one of these self-protective strategies. So resisting, withholding, avoiding, arguing, ignoring, attacking, gossiping, or venting. And all of those behaviors, ironically, are guaranteed to produce or intensify the other person's distrust of me. So down we spiral into deeper distrust. And meanwhile, those around us may begin to distrust both of us because our self-protective behaviors are triggering each other, right? Employees spend about, this is on average globally, my guess is it's actually higher in a lot of workplaces. So employees spend 2.8 hours per week dealing with conflict, mistrust, miscommunication. So you multiply that by the number of people on your team, and you do have a lot of wasted effort, but it's around confusion and lack of trust. So it's really foundational to have high trust on a team to be a high performing team. So when you think about someone you trust, what makes them trustworthy? So Molly, when you think about someone you trust, what are some of the things that you think of when you think about them being trustworthy?
For me, they over communicate. So if I'm saying something to it, there's actually a bantering going back and forth, and they'll clarify, verify, be like, hey, what do you think of this? What have you? Because I feel like we're in partnership. They're present, they're engaged with me versus just sitting there waiting for me to tell them everything. Another thing I think of when I'm in trust with someone is my intuition, just truly how I feel. If I look at all the times that I've had breakdowns in relationships with employees, vendors, clients, what have you, I negated my intuition. And doesn't mean that the person wasn't trustworthy, but I didn't use my voice to kind of clarify and verify and check it and be like, hey, like when you said that, it kind of made me feel like this. I just want to check in, like, are we on the same page or what have you? Like, so there's really no collaboration or communication that's going on. When I think of someone that I trust, what makes them trustworthy? They do what they say they're going to do. And even if they don't do what they say they're going to do, they're going to come back and be like, hey, you told me X, Y, and Z, or what have you. And I went and I either walked away and thought about it and processed it. And I want to come back and just check in on a few things. Or they will come back and say, I was going to think whatever, this one thing. And I come back and no, that doesn't work for me, or I need more information or what have you. So I think, again, it really comes back to open communication where they're carrying, in EO, we have this saying, carry your own luggage. And so they're carrying their own luggage. They're not putting all the pressure on me to have to perform, I think, is what I feel like. What makes them trustworthy is there's no pressure. It's just really fluid.
They're taking full ownership. Yeah, absolutely. That does make sense. And I think you hit on a lot of these distinctions. So here are the 4 distinctions of trust.
Oh.
So Charles Feltman breaks it into these 4 distinctions, and it's really 4 ways in which we assess if we do or don't trust someone in the workplace. Now, there are other frameworks for trust. Brené Brown has an acronym called BRAVING that gets more into really more relational trust issues. I would say this is more around task and workplace trust issues. But here are the 4 distinctions. And I heard almost all of these in the different examples you were using around trustworthiness. So first is sincerity. Do people, are they meaning what they say and saying what they mean? Can they be believed and taken seriously? And I'll go deeper into each of these here. Reliability. Do you meet the commitments you make? So do you keep your promises? Do you follow through? Competence. Do you have the ability to do what you say or propose you're going to do? Meaning, I say I've got it, but maybe my history has shown that I don't have it.
Yes.
And so because I don't have the skills, or because it isn't a strength of mine. And so there might be a distrust there. And then care. So do you have the other person's interests in mind when you're making decisions and taking actions? And I would say, we'll talk about this when we get to care, but the care piece I find in the workplace, especially for owner-operated businesses, law firms, the care can be displayed by employees by caring about the mission and vision of the firm, right? So making sure that you show care about the values and the things that are important, the client experience, for example, to the firm.
Can I say some just really quick that hit me square in the head was sincerity. I even use the word integrity, that you say what you mean and you say what you're going to do, I think is the way I said it. And I use the word integrity, but I love this distinction of sincerity. I see it so different. So often people will say that, well, they lack integrity, or I feel like they're, I didn't see that, they obviously are out of integrity because of the job hopped or whatever story we made in our head.
Right.
But I love, can you believe they're taken serious? I love the sincerity versus integrity. It's really a mind shift for me personally.
I think integrity is a word similar to trust, in that what people mean by integrity can be a little bit different, right? I mean, it can be around, you could almost break integrity down into some of these categories too. And I find sincerity and reliability kind of get combined for integrity sometimes. And yeah, so let's talk about sincerity. So my words and actions are aligned. So I say what I mean and mean what you say. So this is the assessment that you're honest, that you say what you mean what you say. You're honest with yourself. So you're checking intentions and making sure you believe and are committed to what you say. Sometimes with verbal processors, which I am one, I say things and I'm not even sure I mean them yet. I'm careful when I'm working with clients, but if I'm just processing new information, sometimes that can be a challenge. I'm being honest and straightforward with others. My words and actions are aligned. I'm consistent in what I say from one person to the next. So what can happen sometimes, Molly, is I have a conversation with one employee or one team member in the morning, and then things change or shift throughout the day, and I tell a different team member something different later in the day, and I forget to go clean that up. And now those two talk, and it looks like I was insincere. You know, and so it can happen all the time. So this is what I mean. We unintentionally break trust all the time. We want to be giving grace. We want people to assume the best of us, but depending on how each person is wired in their own experience, for some people, sincerity is the most important thing, that you are going to be honest, right? Sometimes you might miss a deadline, but at least don't ever say anything that you don't mean. So what this might sound like is, I could tell he was frustrated, but when I asked him about it, he was honest with me. He didn't just gloss it over to avoid being uncomfortable. And he approached, I appreciated the thoughtful feedback he gave me. When it's not there, it can look like you sense something is off. So you ask your supervisor why people are treating you differently. And instead of telling you the truth that your colleagues are struggling with the way you've maybe been sharp or critical in meetings, she avoids that conflict and tells you, nope, everything's fine. Or it can look like you tell your team that you're going to go to bat for them with leadership, and ask for an adjustment to a timeline. And then you realize in the meeting it's not going to be possible, so you hold back and you don't advocate for your team, but you told them that you were going to. So when we work in a really fast-paced work environment with sometimes competing priorities and commitments, being sincere really takes intention, attention, and dedication. We can say yes to something in a meeting, learn new information later in the day, and change our mind. But if we don't go back and clarify and communicate, it's possible that people will think we're not a person of our word. So here's a trust check, and in the handout that we'll send out, all of these trust check questions are in there. So do you ever avoid giving hard feedback or overemphasizing the positive because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings? Do you ever find yourself changing your mind and communicating a different answer than you did the day before? Are you ever less than sincere? Maybe you don't feel comfortable telling the truth in the moment, so you dodge it, or you say something you don't mean. I see this sometimes when there's a power dynamic, and maybe you have a leader or a law firm owner or a lawyer who is really sharp in their emotional responses. And you want to avoid that. So you're going to maybe say something in the moment to try and avoid that kind of a reaction, but in the process may unintentionally be untruthful or less than sincere. So if people sense that, it might feel like, in my gut, I don't trust them, but really what we're sensing is something's not lining up here, right?
Sometimes I'll hear from the business owners that they are getting resistance from their team members. I love this last one, where you don't feel comfortable telling the truth in the moment, so you dodge it or say something you mean, even if it's like being a yes chick or a yes man. Yeah. And a lot of times I will hear, or if you don't say anything about it, I will hear from business owners all the time, I'm getting resistance from my team. And I'm like, I think I love this. I think it's probably one of these. Thank you for putting like language to it.
Yeah. And I think some of this does come down to psychological safety too. Like, is it safe to tell the truth? Or is there repercussions? And I just got done doing an engagement survey with a large company. And I went and did listening focus groups with employees. So I met with 150 employees over 2 days. And the number one thing I heard was there's repercussions for telling the truth. And leadership assumed that meant that there was like harassment or someone was going to get fired. But really what people mean by repercussions is they're going to get mad at me. They're going to get frustrated. I'm going to have to deal with their sharp, rude behavior. And a lot of the times we don't have the ability to handle that well. And I think that's something to negotiate in the workplace, like depending on the culture and what is expected and what's okay. But just realize that if you're a leader and you respond that way, you are unlikely to get the truth from your team. They are unlikely to give you. So you're going to be met with resistance because it's not safe for them in the moment to tell you what you need to hear.
Yeah. Wow.
So here's some things you can do around sincerity. So make sure you walk your talk. When we express our intentions or desires, we are creating expectations in our listener's mind. So we can say, hey, my intent is to, be as honest as I can be. And yesterday I held back. So, go back and clean things up when you've pulled punches that needed to maybe be things that needed to be said. Be consistent. So make sure that what you are telling people in terms of either direction or decisions, that it's consistent from one person to another, and then clarify. And this isn't a big one. This is a big one for both sides of the relationship. Check in on what people heard you say or are expecting. And if they're not on the same page, you may need to clarify. So let's say you are having a difficult conversation and you can tell the other person is struggling, either because you can see their emotions or they're shutting down. You can tell there's having some sort of emotional response to it. And you can just say, what did you just hear me say? Because maybe what I said was, we've got another mistake on a client, contract. And like, this is the third one this week. And and what I heard was, I'm failing. I'm not doing my job. And so we start to internalize what's going on. And so sometimes even what is said versus what is heard is literally different. If a third party was listening, they might have realized that the words that you heard weren't even used by the speaker. But depending on their tone and their energy, what we translate in our mind can sometimes be different. So it's important to check in and just ask what people are hearing or understanding. So then we move to reliability. So this is the assessment that you meet the commitments you make and you keep your promises. What it sounds like is at the end of every team meeting, we go around and make sure everyone knows the decisions that were made, who's taking what action, and for the most part, people do what they commit to, right? Or I never have to babysit, Joe with a task. If he says he's on it, he's going to get it done. So that's what reliability kind of looks like or sounds like. But then when it's not there, it can sound like, in yesterday's meeting, she agreed that we need to let the client know right away about our decision. So today, when I said something about it, she hadn't contacted them yet. How, she didn't follow through. But it's possible that she didn't understand the timeline, right? Right away, maybe in her mind was 24 hours, in your mind was 5 minutes. So unclear or incomplete requests, offers, and commitments are often the source of unintended breaches of reliability. So I don't know where everyone's located in the country, but here in Minnesota, we have Minnesota NICE, and that's really just Minnesota fear of conflict and fear of being direct. So everything is couched in indirect or unclear conversation, and it really adds confusion. And I would say I've been in lots of places in the country, and it's not different other places. So how clear are you being in your communication, and how well are you doing at clarifying when someone's giving you something to do? Are you asking the right questions to make sure you really understand what done looks like and by when? So indirect or unclear might look like, gosh, I'd love it if you blah, 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 or I really need someone to, or X needs to be done. So making sure that you are really clear, you're giving clear deadlines, Let me know when it's done. I talk to a lot of leaders, Molly, where they say, I don't know how they don't know what's expected.
Absolutely.
And we get in a team environment where we're actually talking about it, and they literally did not understand what was expected. And that is not an intentional thing. That is not someone trying to subvert. Here's the thing I want everyone to hear and know. I don't know. I know maybe a handful of people in all the work I've done who don't want to do a good job. Everyone I know wants to succeed.
Agreed.
So if they know what's expected of them, they are really likely to try and deliver on it. But often we're not quite sure. And if you work with someone who will shift from brainstorming to decision-making to task delegation back to brainstorming, you've had 3 different kinds of conversations in one, and you might have trouble keeping up with what was just an idea versus what was an actual directive versus what has a timeline. And was I supposed to do all of that? Or, so depending on how much time you're allowed to ask questions, it can be hard to discern all of that. So if we have leaders listening, just making sure that you're giving enough time for people to ask some clarifying questions.
And if you're a team member listening, make sure that it's your job to take responsibility, manage and lead and facilitate the conversation like I teach you all, and make sure you do that debrief, even if it's a hallway conversation, a water cooler conversation, run by, a drive by, what have you, where you're stopping and clarifying and verifying, because you have to. That's one of the things I think as entrepreneurs. I love that you said 3 different. Is this brainstorming? Is this direction? And just even looking at that visual, most of them are highly functioning, on the Colby high quick starts, on strength finders, activators, maximizers, like ideation, and they're not going to change their behaviors. However, they can shift with you having their back and managing and facilitating. Because I hear that all the time. I hear that. And I also hear nobody cares. Everybody else, nobody cares as much as I do, entrepreneur, about the clients, about the conversions, about the cash flow, about the calendar, whatever it might be. And the team members are laying awake at 2:00 in the morning because they got indirect information.
They do care, and they're maybe confused. Absolutely. And I love what you just said. Yes, please lead up. So if you just got done with a conversation and you're not quite sure, even if you are sure, it never hurts to say, here's what I'm hearing. We need to do X, Y, and Z by tomorrow, and I will follow up with you by 10:00. So that would actually, I think, take care of a lot of anxiety, that type 3 anxiety that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
With the lawyers, if you were able to take ownership to say, here's what I heard, here's what we're doing, and here's what I'm going to communicate back to you, you've got it then. And but if they don't hear that, and I see this with a lot of business owners, this isn't law firm specific. If they don't hear that, they're now having to run it through their head to make sure, is it going to get done? Did they understand me? Do I need to clarify? They said they have it. Don't I have it? Do they really have it? And there is this thing of control with business owners that is really hard to let go of. But where I see high control owners letting go in a healthy way is when they have someone who is proactively communicating, like you talked about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So trust check on reliability. What kind of requests do you typically make? Is your communication direct or indirect? Paying attention to that. Do you have practices in place that help you clarify and manage expectations, just like we were just talking about? And do you have accountability conversations when people miss deadlines or don't follow through on expectations? If it's a cultural norm to have those conversations, then hopefully then it gets to a point where people aren't getting as defensive. Like, we have these conversations. If a deadline's missed, we're going to talk about what happened. If there was an expectation that we had and it didn't get met, let's talk about what happened. It doesn't have to be that you intentionally are sabotaging the business. It can be a conversation about, hey, I didn't fully understand the deadline. And next time I'm going to ask more questions, or sometimes it's leader, lawyer, you said tomorrow at 10, and now you're asking for it today at 2. And so what needs to be reprioritized to help me make sure that I can get this done for you? So practicing self-accountability. So sometimes we have to say no, and that is, it doesn't have to look like, no, I'm not doing that. It can look like, I have a lot of competing priorities. Can you take 2 minutes to help me reassess to make sure that I'm prioritizing according to what your priorities are? You can own the impact. Thank you for your patience, instead of saying, I'm sorry, this is late. So you can say, thank you for your patience, and then be transparent. I didn't complete X. I had too many competing priorities. I prioritized the things that we talked about this morning. This is going to have to wait. So really taking ownership of what's possible and helping the people that you work with understand what's on your plate, so that you can manage expectations appropriately. So this is more the reliability, the commit, decline, or counter offer. So this might be more with colleagues or even in your personal life. So be clear about what you're committing to, and be clear when you can't do something. Let them know when you can do it by, and give them a date that you could do it by instead. So, that's going to take probably 3 hours. And so tomorrow I can get it to you, probably not by the end of the day. Clarify, do you end meetings or conversations by recapping decisions and clarifying commitments? And then practice healthy boundaries. So every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So really pay attention to where your time is being spent. There's some great tools out there around really assessing where your time is being spent, but making sure that you're being intentional with your time. Molly, anything to say about that?
I love the yes and the no. Every time you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else. I was just reading this in a book last night. Somebody was illustrating that as well. And I had a coach at one point that said to me, it's not what you say yes to, it's what you say no to. And I love this for the team members in particular. Going back to that cartoon that you had back there, when you're saying yes. Yeah, I think, right there. Yeah. When you say yes to what have you, most people do not do that middle slide. I'd love to, but it isn't on the list of my priorities you gave me an hour ago. Like, that's a pretty critical, even just having the capacity, awareness, and ability to even do that. Most people don't. They just say yes to everything. Yes. And then when you don't do it, and you don't follow up, and you don't clarify and verify, and you don't say, I'll get it to you by 9 o'clock, and actually come back at 9 o'clock, even if you missed it, a lot of times it's your lack of project management, number one, but also it's our job to remind our entrepreneurs, our business owner leaders, in regards to what they did give us. Because in my experience, more often than not, the third slide would say something in regards, if you're in my training program, if you're working with someone like Tara and what have you, they're like, wow, thank you so much for reminding me. I'm so incredibly grateful that you are actually running your day, managing your day, managing your priorities. And let's have an adult conversation about this and decide, does something actually have to come up priorities? Because this really, truly is a emergency or what have you. So I love that for everybody listening, and especially for the entrepreneurs, when your team members are like, and one little hack that I had, because I'm a people pleaser. I was a people pleaser, classic middle child, classic peacekeeper, don't rock the boat. I have all the things on my strength finder on everywhere. Check the box. But for me, what I loved too, another thing, one of my first coaches taught me is, it's maybe not just like, if you have to have a hack for yourself to start playing with this, is maybe a no is a not now, if that helps you a little bit.
Yeah, it's a not now or not by the end of the day. It's not a no, it's a renegotiating of priorities, really. And
I love that. And boundaries.
And then having some healthy boundaries, like, And that might mean saying no, or helping people get trained faster who you're working with, so that they can truly own some tasks and you can get them off your plate. So what can you do to empower them, and so that you can get that off your plate, and so that you are more available for the things that come up. So the next one is competence. Competence is the assessment that you have the ability to do what you're doing or supposed to do. Others believe you have the requisite capacity, skill, knowledge, resources, authority to do a particular task or deliver a particular outcome. It means doing something well enough to satisfy the standards of the person who's judging you. And what it sounds like, I gave her the project because I know she can handle it. She has what it takes to figure it out along the way. I've seen her figure it out before. People judge us as competent in one area, but not in others, which is healthy and normal. But sometimes we paint too broad of strokes with competence. So there's the brightness effect that can cause people to confer that if you're highly competent in a few areas, you're highly competent in all the areas. And then that's the kind of the Peter principle, where we promote people beyond their actual capacity and competence. But it's really true. This happens, that brightness effect affects when they're really good at something that you highly value. So this person's really good at something that I really value. So now I trust them with everything, even if they're not necessarily competent in everything I've given them. The opposite can happen, a dimness effect. So when we see someone can't do something, especially if that something comes naturally to us because of how we're wired, then we assume that they are incompetent in most areas. This is where our own biases come into place. That we haven't always named. So it can sound like, I'm not sure that person has what it takes. But have you really assessed whether or not that person is competent in those areas? And have you really defined what the standards are? So often we say they don't have what it takes, but we haven't taken time to really define it. So a trust check with competence is consider someone who you question their competence. What are the standards you're using to assess their abilities? Is it safe for people to ask questions and admit when they have room to improve without being judged or as being incompetent? I've been in workplaces where I needed to learn something, or maybe people needed to learn, but it wasn't safe for them to admit they needed to learn. So they weren't given the space or time to learn. And then they got passed over for opportunities to grow. And then we keep people stuck in that area of low competence, right? They don't have an opportunity to stretch. Are we self-aware, open and honest about our own opportunities? Are we willing to ask for help when it's needed? And are our standards of competence and excellence clear and agreed upon on the team? So there's a lot of perfectionism that comes into areas of high control. Perfectionism isn't possible, but what are the standards of excellence? And can we agree on those so that we can talk about them if we're not meeting them? And it's possible that Molly, you don't want to give me the responsibility of having to make sure that spelling is accurate in everything that I do.
Me either.
So I have a lot of respect for people who have high attention to detail in that way. That isn't the best use of my skills, but I know that I have to have people checking my work, on that. So I have to have that, but I'm open and honest about that. So it used to burn me in competence. I used to work at a bank where accuracy was really important. So compliance was on me all the time. And I just learned to then have someone else checking my work. And then I started just owning the fact that, this isn't an area of strength for me. It never was going to be. So I may as well own that. And I earned more trust and respect by just being upfront and honest about it than trying to kind of defend myself and justify why I was missing things.
Yes. And I love that, because owning it, naming it, saying it up front. And I think that so often that's where attorneys in particular, but entrepreneurs will cut someone off because, well, I'm not going to hire Tara because she has spelling errors and typos in her resume or what have you. But I have to grab onto this because with Grammarly and now all this AI stuff and what have you, that's, yes, accuracy and competence, one portion of your job, but it's client facing. How much of your job was the relationships, and was it making feel they're people, you know, especially with banks, just or law firms or any business. Right now, I'm like, how are all these banks in my tiny cow town staying in business? The competition's fierce. But if they have someone like you truly being a relationship person and making certain that they feel cared for, what have you, and you're not just interviewing you or keeping on you or judging you or coming back to the trust because of the typos.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, being able to admit our mistakes is important here, to be able to take ownership of when we do make mistakes or we have fallen short, I think can earn a lot of trust and respect. So actions to take around competence. So really define success and clarify standards. So be clear about how you're measuring success or how your supervisor, boss, the lawyer is measuring success. And how are they assessing competence so that others know where they stand? Being honest and willing to learn. So claiming your own strengths and being honest about areas that don't come as naturally. Communicate where you're willing to learn. And then seek feedback. So this is a powerful way not only to grow yourself, but also to earn trust. Proactively seek feedback from your direct reports, peers, leaders to understand their standards and your opportunities to improve. If you can learn how to proactively seek and receive feedback in a healthy way, you will be farther ahead than most of your peers. It is a really hard skill. It's a hard skill because it requires us to get over our defensiveness, which we'll talk about more on Thursday with a conflict. But a lot of us struggle with receiving feedback well. And that's partly because only about 10 to 15% of leaders are self-aware of the impact that they have. And as power and influence increases, our self-awareness decreases because people aren't as honest with us. So we were just talking earlier, people can't always speak that truth to power, right? Because we're self-protective and defensive, or because we started to drink our own Kool-Aid. And so self-awareness goes down the longer we're in positions of authority. And so just, you know, keep that in mind. And how can you work to grow your own self-awareness? And during the last few years of the pandemic, Gallup has studied the managers and leaders most likely to not just survive, but thrive. And the number one predictor of success in leadership in crisis is growth mindset. So that is the ability to be open to feedback and say, how can I change and grow from what I'm learning? So this brings us to care. The last distinction is the foundational distinction. It's care. It's the assessment that you have the other person's interests in mind, as well as your own when you're making decisions and taking actions. So this sounds like my boss genuinely wants me to thrive. She cares about me beyond this job, and I know she's investing in me as a person, not just to get an outcome. Without care, you may have conditional trust with team members, and that's better than distrust, but then you have to negotiate trust with every single transaction if people don't believe you care about them. So it can sound, that sometimes sounds like I can work with her, but I just don't trust her any farther than I can throw her. You know, I can give her something, but really what we mean is, I don't know if they care about the things I care about. I don't know if they care or are taking into consideration the things that are important. We might believe them to be dependable, but we don't trust them with anything beyond that task. So a trust check on care. To what extent do you have their interests in mind as well as your own? And how do you let them know? How often do you make intentional time to connect and show interest in your colleagues beyond work and the outcomes? And what evidence is there that you care about the well-being and interests of our colleagues? Now, this one is interesting. A lot of owner operators struggle with this one because time is such a rare commodity. Having time to connect and show care can be really challenging. And if it doesn't come naturally to you, you have to be intentional about it. And then it takes a little bit more energy. But I will tell you, even if you don't like that this is a foundational piece of trust, it absolutely, from a research base, is. If people don't feel you care about them, you are going to struggle with trust in the workplace. So some actions you can take: taking time to listen, even when it's not on the agenda or not convenient. So prioritizing people over tasks to a certain extent. I'm not saying you have to spend hours, but taking a minute to make eye contact, say hi, ask how someone's doing goes a long way. Curiosity. So what are their interests and concerns, hopes and desires, even from the career standpoint? Where do they want to go in their career? Are you taking time to understand that? And then connecting how your decisions and actions have taken their interests into consideration, or acknowledge the impact that your decisions might be having on others and why you made that choice. So acknowledging, hey, I thought about this. I realize this is going to be more work, and here's why we have to do it. Just acknowledging that I thought about it. You know, I'm not just being callous about the fact that I want you to work more. Molly, were you going to say something there?
No, I couldn't agree more. Could not agree more.
So if you're, when you're listening, I want you to just take a minute and think about, of the 4 areas of these 4 distinctions of trust, which of them do you do best? So all of us have 1 or 2 of these that come really naturally. We probably don't have to do any more work there. But all of us, if we go through those trust check questions we just went through, have 1 or 2 areas where, you know what, I don't always do those things. I don't always clarify, or I don't always say exactly what I mean. I don't take time to just make sure people, you know, I make eye contact and say hi to people. So where do you have an opportunity to improve? And what would be helpful for your colleagues to understand about this with trust? And then what happens once trust is broken? So I want to talk about this just really quick too. So you can see when we go through, Molly, I think that we unintentionally can break trust all the time, right? So if you fall short in any of those separate questions, you might break trust or have broken trust. And it doesn't mean that you intended to. And I think that's where we get hung up with the word trust is, don't you trust that my intentions were good? Don't you, like, why are you not assuming the best of me? But you might have fallen short in those areas. So when that happens, what can we do to rebuild it? So there's connection, and then there's disconnection and reconnection. So here's the 7 reconnection guidelines. So 1 is ownership. Start with my part is, here's what happened. Here's what I did, right? Empathize. I imagine the impact on you is you were up late last night having to work on this because I missed a deadline, right? Or I raised my voice and I can see that shut you down. And then validate the hurt or the result. I can understand, that makes sense. I would be frustrated if I were you as well. The impact, share the impact of their behavior on you. I lost trust because of this. I know you want to support the family, and that's amazing, but when you don't return my calls or texts after a few days, I feel dismissed. So let them know. And then change, make a reasonable request for change, or state that you will change. So moving forward, I'd like to ask for, I need you to let me know if you're going to miss a deadline at least a couple hours in advance. We need to talk about it, right? And then what did you learn about yourself, about the other person, about your dynamic? So this conflict's been hard, but it's teaching me that it's teaching me what? Or I'm also learning that you need more communication from me, or I wonder if we can, and then have a conversation and collaborate. Here's some ways we can move forward with this. What can we do differently, right? So this kind of encapsulates taking ownership of the piece of it that's yours, and then moving towards, as you said earlier, an adult conversation about how to move forward, right? But a lot of times people want to understand the impact that it had. And if you don't acknowledge the impact, they might think you're just saying whatever you need to say in order to get, to be forgiven, not necessarily to resolve it or to reconnect.
So sometimes it could seem like it's inauthentic.
Yeah.
If that's the case. I love what you have here, talking about the villain and the victim, and then moving to both. Because I think for so often the boss, the leader, always feels like the victim, even sometimes if it's not verbally said, or they're portrayed at that of the villain rather, and then the employees by and large feel like the victim.
Yeah. But sometimes I've been an employee many times. Sometimes we're the ones who were the perpetrator, right? We did something wrong. We missed something. We made a mistake. We're human. We're fallible. It's okay. It needs to be okay for us to be human, but this makes it easier to have conversations about how to move forward. And that ownership and empathy about the impact is really the key around rebuilding that connection with people and rebuilding trust. So these kinds of things. So then you don't have to feel like I have to be perfect to earn trust, but you do need to be intentional to earn trust. You don't have to be perfect, but you need to be intentional.
I love that, because I'll always hear, well, trust is earned, but I mean, that's a blanket statement, but I love the intentionality that you have here, and going back to those 4 distinctions as well, and really seeing where you're in balance, where you feel like you have it nailed, where you feel like you might be out of balance, or maybe you're unsure and you really need to sit down and have a coffee clutch and have a really heart-to-heart conversation and check in. I would recommend that every person in the law firm admin boot camp, every person listening, watching to this, that they go back and use this workshop as a way for you to really anchor to it. Treat it as a lunch and learn with your team members, a way to reconnect and really check in on where we're at.
Yeah, and the work I do with teams, we'll go through this content, but then we'll really dig in. We'll use strengths, but we'll dig in and say, where are the triggers around trust for each person, and really helping them name those together, and talking about, talking about ways to move forward and what to understand, because a lot of times we assume intent, and that's where task conflict turns into relational conflict. So we had an issue with the task, but now I've assumed intent, or I've blame, right? And now we've got shame, and we've got malintent, and none of those things were probably real, but our brains like to make that up because we want to have a reason for everything. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a couple of days. So just asking people, so trust next step. So take the trust check with your team and discuss. Molly just mentioned that, and pick one thing you can do to improve trustworthiness for yourself. Here's the thing, Molly, there isn't anyone I've ever met who said, I'm not trustworthy. I wouldn't trust me if I were you. Everyone believes they're trustworthy. Everyone believes they're trustworthy. So the person that you don't trust, they believe they're trustworthy too. So what can you do to improve trustworthiness with the people you work with? And that's the place to start. You might have listened today and thought, oh my gosh, so-and-so needs to hear this. Absolutely. And what can you do, right? Yeah. So we will continue the conversation on Thursday with information on, okay, so once these things happen and we enter into conflict, what do we do with that? And why does conflict get escalated, and how do we handle it?
I'm so excited for that. I love this. So you can invite Tara to come in and facilitate trust building. Many of you have, and you should have at this point, quarterly strategic planning retreats on your calendar, not where you're only working on strategy, but where you're working on communication, trust, breakdowns, breakthroughs, all the things that we're consistently talking about. And you hear me say over and over and over and over again, that's an opportunity to bring in an outside facilitator. It's a gift to give you all the opportunity to lean back and not have to manage and lead an agenda. And let's be honest, most of us aren't even equipped to have all this knowledge and expertise that Tara has. So bringing in an expert in this area. So I definitely want, Tara, for you to communicate how people can best connect with you. I'll make sure I have, there we go. Yeah, great. So
feel free to email me.
Yeah,
and the handout that we're sending out has my emails. So feel free to email me. We also do workshops. And so we have one coming up in May on boundaries. So if you struggle with setting your own boundaries, either in the workplace or relationally, and then we also have a podcast. I say we, I have a colleague, Pamela, and I, and we tag team a podcast called the Grounding and Growing Leadership Podcast.
The Braving Boundaries, virtual, in office, in person?
Virtual. Yep, that's virtual. May 17th from 11 to 12:30 Central Standard Time. And if you shoot me an email, I'll send you the registration link and a code for a discount on that too.
Okay, Tara at Align, ALIGN transform.com.
Yes.
Shoot an email, May 17th, 11 to 12:30. Braving Boundaries. Absolutely. I'm going to be there. And Grounding and Growing Leadership podcast. So connect, all the ways to connect. Thursday, we're going to be hitting conflict.
We'll see you then.
All right, Tara, thank you. Amazing.
Thank you.
We've reached the end of yet another episode of the Hire and Empower with Molly McGrath podcast, where dream teams of entrepreneurs in an entrepreneur's world really do come true. Listen, whether you're a business owner, employee, executive, or hiring manager, we fully understand hiring, onboarding, and leadership is expensive, exhausting, often overwhelming, and absolutely time-consuming for the already taxed professional. Well, we have your back on all fronts. For 25 years and counting, we have transformed over 4,000 law firm teams into the most efficient, resourceful, and profitable asset of your business. Check out our Smart Hire solution, our employee leadership program, and the 66-day law firm turnaround at hiringandempowering.com.